The ammonia from the glass cleaner had started to burn the inside of my nostrils hours ago. But I'd learned to breathe through my mouth during my 3 weeks at the Venetian Grande. Each spray released a cloud that caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating tiny rainbows that disappeared as quickly as they formed. Beautiful and temporary, just like everything else in this place that cost more per night than I made in a month. My reflection in the mirror I was polishing showed a woman I barely recognized anymore. Hair pulled back so tightly it made my temples ache. The standard-issue gray uniform that somehow managed to be both shapeless and too tight across the shoulders, and eyes that had learned to look down. Always down. 3 weeks of invisible labor. 3 weeks of pretending I didn't hear the conversations that happened around me as if I were furniture. 3 weeks of rebuilding a life from ashes. The 19th floor of the Venetian Grande was reserved for what management called distinguished guests, which was code for people whose names you saw in newspapers, but never for good reasons. Today's distinguished guest was Enzo Marciano, and even the way the staff whispered his name carried weight. The floors above and below his penthouse suite had been mysteriously cleared, and security had tripled overnight. Not hotel security. Those men in expensive suits with earpieces and eyes that never stopped moving. I wasn't supposed to be on this floor. My assignment was levels 12 through 15, where the merely wealthy stayed. But Maria had called in sick, and Mrs. Kowalski, our floor supervisor, had grabbed me at morning briefing with the desperation of someone who knew better than to leave any area unserviced when certain guests were in residence. Just the hallways and the mirror panels, she'd instructed, her Polish accent thickening with stress. Stay quiet. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, Amelia, don't linger. I hadn't planned to linger, but when you spend your days being invisible, you develop a different way of seeing. You notice things. Like the way two of Mr. Marciano's bodyguards, the ones positioned at the end of the hallway near the service elevator, kept checking their phones with a frequency that didn't match their supposed vigilance. Like how they angled their bodies away from the main suite door, creating a blind spot. Like how the bigger one, the one with a scar cutting through his eyebrow, smiled at something on his screen in a way that made my stomach clench with recognition. I'd seen that smile before, on men who'd stood in my father's kitchen 8 years ago, drinking his coffee and eating my mother's biscotti while they planned his death. My hand stilled on the mirror panel, the microfiber cloth suspended mid-wipe. The glass cleaner dripped down in slow rivulets, distorting the reflection of the hallway behind me. In the warped image, I could see scarred eyebrow typing rapidly, his thick fingers surprisingly quick on the small screen. His partner, shorter, but wider, with arms that strained against his suit jacket, leaned in to look, and they both nodded. This wasn't casual scrolling. This was coordination. The bottle of cleaner trembled in my grip. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep my movement steady. My father had taught me that staying alive sometimes meant staying still, being patient, watching the predators circle until you understood their pattern. He'd learned that lesson too late, but he'd made sure I learned it early. I moved to the next panel, closer to them now. Close enough to hear the quiet buzz of a phone on vibrate. Close enough to see scarred eyebrows screen when he tilted it at the wrong angle, or maybe the right angle, if God or fate or my father's ghost was still looking out for me. The text was in Italian, but my grandmother had made sure I understood the language even if I couldn't speak it perfectly. 3 words blazed in my vision. 15 minutes, basement entrance. My hands were definitely shaking now. I sprayed the mirror again, creating more of those temporary rainbows, buying time to think. 15 minutes until what? Until someone came through the basement entrance? Until these two were supposed to do something? Until... The suite door opened, and the hallway transformed. 4 more bodyguards materialized from positions I hadn't even registered, forming a loose perimeter. And then he stepped out. Enzo Marciano didn't look like a monster. That was the first thought that cut through my panic. He looked like money, and power had been poured into an Italian suit that probably cost more than the used car I didn't own. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on old Roman coins, all strong lines and aristocratic angles. Tall enough that he commanded space without trying, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of discipline rather than vanity. But it was his eyes that caught me, even though I was supposed to be looking down, always down, dark and assessing, the kind of eyes that noticed everything, almost everything. He walked past me without a glance, as expected. I was part of the wallpaper, another fixture in the expensive hallway. His entourage moved with him. The legitimate bodyguards, the ones whose eyes never stopped scanning, whose hands stayed close to weapons I wasn't supposed to know they carried. But Scarred Eyebrow and his partner stayed put, still covering that blind spot, still checking their phones. 13 minutes now, probably. Maybe 12. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, speaking in the Portuguese she'd used when the lessons were important. Sometimes the bravest thing is to speak when staying silent would be safer. Your father forgot that. Don't you forget it too. The cleaner bottle slipped from my fingers. It hit the polished marble with a sound that cracked through the hushed hallway like a gunshot. Blue liquid spread across the floor, pooling around my worn sneakers. Merda, I whispered, dropping to my knees, using the spill as an excuse to stay, to think, to make a choice that would either save a life or end mine. Mr. Marciano's voice carried from down the hall, speaking rapid Italian into a phone. Something about a shipment, about timing, about trust. The legitimate guards had followed him toward the private elevator that would take him down to the lobby, to a car, to whatever meeting justified this level of security. Right into whatever was waiting at the basement entrance. I stood up, leaving the spill, breaking every rule Mrs. Kowalski had drilled into me. My legs carried me forward before my mind caught up, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. The scared part of me that had kept me alive these past 8 years screamed to stop, to return to invisibility, to let powerful men handle their own dangerous games. But the part of me that was my father's daughter, that remembered the sound of gunshots in our kitchen and my mother's screaming, that part was already moving. Mr. Marciano stood near the elevator, flanked by his guards. So close. Close enough to see the platinum watch on his wrist, the kind of timepiece that probably had more complications than I had problems. Close enough to smell his cologne, something with notes of bergamot and cedar that reminded me of the expensive candles in the hotel's boutique. I approached with a cleaning rag in my hand, as if I belonged there, as if I had a reason to intrude on his space. One of the guards stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Mr. Marciano," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, every syllable of English feeling thick on my tongue. "Your bodyguards at the service elevator. They're going to betray you." Time suspended. The guard reaching for his weapon froze mid-motion. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open with mechanical indifference. And Enzo Marciano turned to look at me, really look at me, for the first time. His eyes were colder than I'd thought. Colder and infinitely more dangerous. "What did you say?" His voice was low, controlled, the kind of calm that preceded violence. I swallowed hard, forcing my trembling hands to still. "Your men at the service elevator, the one with the scar and his partner, they've been texting in Italian, about the basement entrance, about 15 minutes. I glanced at the slim watch Mrs. Kowalski insisted we all wear for punctuality. 11 minutes now, maybe less. "Who are you?" He stepped closer, and I understood why people feared him. It wasn't the muscles or the height or the expensive suit. It was the absolute certainty in his movements, the knowledge that he had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with money or violence or both. "Nobody," I answered honestly. "Just someone who's seen betrayal before. Just someone who recognized the look in their eyes." One of his guards, older than the others, with silver threading through his dark hair, spoke quickly in Italian. "Dawn, she's one of the cleaning staff. Could be a distraction, a plant." "Or," Mr. Marciano interrupted, his gaze never leaving my face, "she could be telling the truth." He turned his head slightly, addressing the silver-haired guard without breaking eye contact with me. "Tommaso, check it, discreetly." Tommaso moved with surprising speed for a man his age, walking casually toward the service elevator area. The other guards shifted, creating a tighter formation around Mr. Marciano. Around me too, I realized. I wasn't sure if I was being protected or detained. "What's your name?" Mr. Marciano asked. "Amelia." The word came out steadier than I felt. "Amelia Duarte." "Portuguese?" I nodded. "And how does a Portuguese cleaning woman recognize Italian betrayal at a glance?" The elevator doors started to close. Mr. Marciano caught them with one hand, holding them open, waiting for my answer, waiting to decide if I was a savior or a threat. "My father," I said quietly, the words costing more than I expected. He trusted the wrong people. Men who smiled while they planned. Men who texted their partners while they stood guard. Men who... Tommaso's voice crackled through the earpiece Mr. Marciano wore, urgent and sharp. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the change in his expression. Saw the cold assessment transform into something harder, sharper. "Get back," he ordered me, but his hand closed around my wrist. Not roughly, but with absolute authority. "You're coming with us." "What?" "No, The service elevator," he said, pulling me into the main elevator with him, his guards crowding in after us. "Someone cut the brake cables. If I'd taken it, which was the plan." He didn't finish, didn't need to. The doors closed, and the elevator began its descent. I stood pressed between expensive suits and the scent of gun oil, my cheap uniform stained with glass cleaner. My minimum wage life intersecting catastrophically with a world I'd sworn never to touch again. Mr. Marciano still held my wrist, his grip warm through the thin fabric of my sleeve. "The basement entrance?" he asked. "That's where they're coordinating," I managed. The texts said 15 minutes. Whatever they planned for the elevator was Plan A. The basement is probably Plan B. He smiled then, and it was nothing like the smile I'd seen on Scarred Eyebrow. This smile was sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous. "Then we'll take the back exit," he said, looking at me with something that might have been respect, or might have been calculation. "You know where it is, Amelia Duarte, who recognizes betrayal?" I did. 3 weeks of cleaning the hotel's forgotten corners had taught me every route, every exit, every camera blind spot. The knowledge had been survival insurance, a way to escape if my past ever found me. I'd never imagined using it to save a mafia boss. "Yes," I whispered. "I know the way." "Then show me," Enzo Marciano said. And somehow, in that moment, with his hand on my wrist and his trust placed in a stranger with a spray bottle, the trajectory of both our lives shifted irrevocably. The elevator continued its descent, carrying us toward a choice I'd never planned to make and a future I couldn't yet imagine. But I'd learned one thing from my father's death. Sometimes staying silent was the most dangerous choice of all. I'd spoken. Now I had to survive the consequences. The service corridors of the Venetian Grande existed in a different dimension from the plush hallways where guests glided between their suites and the restaurant. Here, the walls were unpainted concrete, the lighting harsh fluorescent that buzzed with electrical complaint, and the air smelled of industrial detergent and the grease from kitchen exhaust vents. This was where the invisible people moved, carrying other people's trash, pushing carts loaded with luxury linens, making the magic happen behind the scenes. I'd memorized these corridors in my first week, not because I was conscientiously learning my job, but because 8 years of running had taught me that knowing the exits was the difference between survival and ending up like my father, bleeding out on kitchen tile while his so-called friends walked away counting blood money. "Left here," I said quietly, leading Enzo Marciano and his 4 remaining guards through a narrow passage I'd used dozens of times to avoid unwanted attention. The space was tight enough that they had to move single file, their expensive shoes scuffing on concrete that never saw polish. This connects to the loading dock area, but there's a fire exit halfway through that's never locked because the kitchen staff use it for smoke breaks. Tommaso, the silver-haired guard who checked my story, spoke into his wrist mic, coordinating something I couldn't hear. Behind us, the sounds of the hotel continued obliviously. Elevator chimes, the distant clatter of meal service. Someone's radio playing meringue too loud. Normal sounds. While armed men hunted us through the building. Mr. Marciano moved beside me now, having pushed forward through his protective detail with the kind of authority that didn't need to be verbal. Up close, I could see details I'd missed in the hallway. The faint scar along his jawline, barely visible unless the harsh fluorescent light caught it at the right angle. The calluses on his hands that suggested he knew his way around violence personally, not just by delegation. The way his eyes swept each corner before we turned, the same scanning pattern I'd developed over years of watching for threats. "You're calm," he observed, his voice low enough that only I could hear over the sound of our footsteps echoing off concrete. "Most people would be panicking right now." Panic gets you killed, I replied automatically, then bit my lip. That sounded too practiced, too knowing. I was supposed to be just a cleaning lady, not someone who understood the mechanics of survival in dangerous situations. His eyes narrowed slightly. Your father, the one who trusted the wrong people. What happened to him? We reached an intersection where 3 corridors met. I paused, listening. The third shift kitchen staff would be prepping for dinner service now, which meant the corridor to the right would have traffic. Left was storage, usually empty this time of day. Straight ahead was our best option. He's dead, I said flatly, moving forward. Murdered by men he considered friends. Men who smiled at our family dinners and helped with our restaurant and promised loyalty while they were selling information to his competitors. I felt him processing this, calculating what it meant that a dead man's daughter had just saved his life from a similar betrayal. Your father was in the life, he stated. Not a question. My father ran a small construction business in Queens, legitimate work mostly. But he had connections. He knew people. Sometimes he did favors for those people. I ducked under a low-hanging pipe that I'd learned to anticipate. Behind me, I heard one of the guards curse quietly as he barely avoided it. One of those favors was noticing that a shipment schedule had been leaked. He told the wrong person he'd noticed. That person was the one doing the leaking. And you were there when they came for him. The fire exit appeared ahead, marked only by the red emergency light above it. Through the small window, I could see the narrow alley where kitchen staff took their smoke breaks, empty now in the gap between lunch and dinner shifts. I was hiding in our pantry, I said, stopping at the door and testing the handle slowly, carefully. No resistance. No alarm. I heard everything, saw everything through the crack in the door. My father begging them to spare my mother. Them laughing. The handle turned completely. Cool air from outside whispered through the gap. They made me understand something important that day, Mr. Marciano. They made me understand that loyalty is a lie people tell when they want something from you. I pushed the door open fully, scanning the alley for threats. Empty. Just dumpsters and the ghost of cigarette smoke. Behind me, Tommaso and another guard moved forward, checking angles, securing the space before allowing their boss to step through. And yet, Enzo Marciano said, moving past me into the alley, you just risked your life to warn me. A stranger. Someone whose organization probably isn't that different from the one that killed your father. He turned to face me, standing in the gray light of the overcast afternoon, looking impossibly elegant even in an alley that smelled of garbage and old cooking oil. Why? I stepped out after him, letting the door close behind us. The question was fair. Why had I done it? Why risk everything I'd rebuilt? My anonymous life, my safe job, my careful invisibility, for a man I'd never met. Because I saw the look in those men's eyes, I said finally. The same look I saw 8 years ago, and I thought. I paused, unsure how to articulate the impulse that had made me act. I thought maybe this time, someone should warn the target. His expression shifted, something almost like respect crossing his features before it disappeared behind the mask of control he wore like armor. Tommaso, he said without breaking eye contact with me. Status? Hotel security found the service elevator cable. Clean cut. Professional work. They're sweeping the basement level now, but whoever was waiting has scattered. The 2 at the service elevator position. Tommaso's voice went cold. They're gone, cleared out the moment we changed direction. Inside job, another guard muttered. Someone gave up our security positions, our timing, everything. Mr. Marciano's jaw tightened, but his voice remained perfectly calm. Carlo, get 3 cars here. Different routes out. 1 decoy, 2 real. Spread the team across them. He glanced at his watch, that complicated platinum piece that probably told time in 6 different time zones and calculated the phases of the moon. We have about 5 minutes before this alley is compromised if they're competent, which we have to assume they are. The guards moved into action with the efficiency of men who'd executed emergency protocols before. Phones came out. Quick calls were made in Italian too rapid for me to follow completely. I caught fragments. Betrayal. Internal breach. Safe House Alpha. I started to edge toward the alley opening, toward the street beyond, where I could disappear into Manhattan's crowds, and pretend this had never happened. Return to my invisible life. Clock in for my next shift. Polish mirrors and scrub toilets, and collect my small paycheck, and never, ever intersect with this world again. Enzo Marciano's hand closed around my wrist, gently, but with absolute certainty. Where do you think you're going, Amelia Duarte? Back to work? I tried, hating how my voice rose at the end, turning it into a question. My shift isn't over until 6. Mrs. Kowalski will be looking for me. Your shift, he repeated, something almost like amusement in his tone. You just saved my life, exposed a security breach in my organization, and now you want to return to cleaning toilets? It's honest work, I said defensively, and it's mine. I earned it. Nobody handed it to me because of my connections or my name. Nobody can take it away because I crossed the wrong person. They already can, he said quietly, and something in his voice made my stomach drop. The men who tried to kill me tonight know that someone warned me. They saw you talking to me. They watched me follow your advice instead of taking the service elevator. And they're smart enough to know that dead mafia bosses don't answer questions, but cleaning women who witness too much. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I didn't see anything, I insisted, trying to pull my wrist free. His grip remained firm, not painful, but unmovable. I don't know anything. I can keep my mouth shut. I've been doing it for 8 years. 8 years? Tommaso interjected, moving closer. How old were you when your father was killed? 17, I admitted. Young enough that they didn't see me as a threat. Young enough to disappear. But not young enough to forget, Mr. Marciano observed. Not young enough to stop recognizing the signs. Not young enough to stay silent when you saw betrayal happening again. His thumb moved against my wrist, resting on my pulse point, where my heartbeat surely betrayed my fear. You have the instincts of someone who's been hunted, Amelia, which means you know I'm right. The moment you walk away from this alley, you become a liability, a witness, a loose end. Then what? The question came out sharper than I intended, edged with the anger that had been building since I'd made the choice to speak. You're saying I traded my invisible life for what? Your protection? Your employment? Another version of the same trap my father died in? I'm saying, he replied, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, that you traded your invisible life the moment you opened your mouth. There's no going back to before, only forward to what comes next. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the alley entrance, their tinted windows reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. The guards moved immediately, creating a protective formation around Mr. Marciano. Boss, Carlo said urgently, we need to move. Now. Mr. Marciano nodded, but his hand remained on my wrist. You're coming with us. We'll sort out the details of your new situation once we're somewhere secure. I don't want a new situation, I protested, even as I let him guide me toward the middle vehicle. I want my anonymous life back. That life ended when you decided to save mine, he said, opening the SUV door himself rather than letting one of his guards do it. Get in, Amelia, unless you'd rather take your chances alone in New York knowing that someone wants to eliminate all witnesses to tonight's failure. I looked at the open door, at the expensive leather interior, at the implicit choice he was offering. Trust him, or trust my ability to stay hidden from professional killers who'd already proven they could infiltrate security, plan complex hits, and had every reason to tie up loose ends. My father had trusted the wrong people. But he'd also taught me that sometimes the enemy you can see is safer than the threats you can't. I climbed into the SUV. Mr. Marciano slid in beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the cedar and bergamot of his cologne mixing with the leather scent of the interior. The guards took positions in the front seats and the other vehicles. Doors slammed with expensive, solid thuds. Where are we going? I asked, as the vehicle pulled smoothly into traffic, blending seamlessly with the evening rush of Manhattan. Somewhere safe, he replied, already pulling out his phone, typing something rapidly. Somewhere I can figure out who in my organization betrayed me, how deep it goes, and what they wanted badly enough to risk my wrath. And what about me? I watched the familiar streets slide past the tinted windows, watching my normal life literally disappearing behind us. What happens to the cleaning woman who saw too much? He looked up from his phone, those dark eyes assessing me with an intensity that made me want to look away. I didn't. I'd spent 8 years looking away, being invisible, accepting whatever role kept me safe, but something had shifted in that hallway, in that choice to speak. That, he said slowly, depends on you, on what you want, on what you're willing to become. I want to survive, I answered honestly. That's all I've wanted since I was 17. His expression shifted, something almost like understanding crossing his features. Survival, he repeated. That's not a small thing, Amelia Duarte. But it's also not the largest thing. He leaned back against the leather seat, still watching me. I think you want more than just survival. I think that's why you spoke up today. Because somewhere inside you, there's still the girl who believed her father when he said loyalty meant something, who believed that doing the right thing mattered. That girl is dead, I said flatly. She died in a pantry listening to her father beg for mercy he didn't get. No, he said softly. She didn't. Because if she had, you would have stayed silent today. Let me walk into that elevator. Let the cables snap and the body fall and walked away clean. Back to your invisible life, your honest work, your safe anonymity. His phone buzzed, but he ignored it. But you didn't. You chose to speak, to warn, to risk. That's not survival instinct. That's conscience. I wanted to argue. Wanted to deny that anything noble had motivated my choice. But sitting in that expensive SUV, being carried toward an unknown future by a man I'd just saved, I couldn't quite articulate the lie convincingly enough to believe it myself. What comes next? I asked instead, accepting the reality of my situation. After we reach wherever we're going? Next, Enzo Marziano said, his attention returning to his phone. I make some calls, find out who I can still trust, figure out who's trying to kill me and why. He glanced at me sideways, and we figure out what to do with a cleaning woman who has better instincts than half my security team and knows enough about betrayal to spot it at a glance. The SUV turned onto a highway, accelerating smoothly. Through the windshield, I could see one of the decoy vehicles peeling off, taking a different route. Protection or paranoia or both. The world I'd just entered had different rules, different assumptions, different prices for mistakes. I thought about my grandmother, who'd taught me Portuguese, and warned me about trusting the wrong people. About my father, who died because he'd trusted too much and questioned too little. About the last 8 years of careful invisibility, of small paychecks and anonymous apartments and deliberately forgettable days. All of it ending because I'd recognized a look in a betrayer's eyes and chosen to speak instead of staying silent. I don't know anything about your world, I said quietly, watching the city lights begin to glow as evening settled over Manhattan. I'm not trained for this. I'm not educated for this. I'm just someone who saved my life, he interrupted, which makes you more valuable than you realize, Amelia Duarte, and more at risk. His phone buzzed again, a different tone this time, urgent, demanding. He looked at the screen, and something hardened in his expression. We have a problem. Another one? I tried for humor, but it came out strained. The 2 guards, the ones you identified, they've been found. Something in his tone made me tense. Found? Dead, he said flatly. Both of them. Professional execution. Whoever hired them is cleaning up loose ends. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw the truth he was too pragmatic to hide. Which means they'll be coming for you next, because you're the one loose end they don't control. The SUV seemed suddenly smaller, the leather seats less comfortable, the man beside me less protective and more like a storm I'd chosen to walk directly into. How long? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. How long until they find me? That, Enzo Marziano said, depends on how good my people are at keeping you hidden, and how badly someone wants all the witnesses dead. He turned back to his phone, typing rapidly, issuing orders in Italian too quick for me to fully follow. But I caught enough. Safe house, maximum security, no communication with the outside, indefinite timeline. I'd walked out of that hotel as a cleaning woman, looking to save a stranger's life. I was now cargo in a mob war, protected and trapped in equal measure, my invisible life shattered beyond repair. The only question remaining was whether I'd survive long enough to regret my choice. Or if this time, choosing to speak would finally cost me everything. The safe house wasn't what I'd expected. Maybe I'd been influenced by too many movies. Those grim, warehouse-style hideouts with bare bulbs and uncomfortable cots. Instead, the black SUV delivered us to a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, the kind of elegant old building that had been converted into expensive apartments, with original stonework and artfully placed lighting that made the autumn leaves on the street trees look like they'd been painted there by an optimist. "You hide in plain sight," I observed as Tommaso opened the vehicle door, scanning the quiet street before allowing us to exit. "Always," Mr. Marciano replied, his hand returning to that now familiar position at the small of my back, guiding, protective, possessive all at once. The best hiding places are the ones that don't look like hiding places. Inside, the building smelled of old wood and money. That particular scent of quality that doesn't announce itself, but permeates everything anyway. The apartment occupied the entire third floor, accessed by a private elevator that required a key card and a biometric scan. More security than I'd seen outside a bank vault. The door opened into an open-plan living space that managed to be both luxurious and comfortable. Exposed brick walls, modern furniture in shades of cream and charcoal, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the street with bulletproof glass that was probably expensive enough to finance a small country. Art on the walls, the kind I'd only seen in museums, where even the frames were worth more than my annual salary. "You'll stay here," Mr. Marciano said, moving through the space with the familiarity of someone who'd been here before. Many times. "Second bedroom is yours. Everything you need is already stocked. Clothes, toiletries, food. Tommaso will be in the first bedroom. Carlo's team rotates surveillance from the building across the street. You don't leave without clearance. You don't contact anyone from your former life. You exist in this space until I determine it's safe for you to exist elsewhere." "Prison with better decorating," I said, running my fingers along the back of an armchair that probably cost more than 3 months of my hotel wages. His expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "Protection with better amenities. There's a difference." "Is there?" I moved to the windows, looking down at the street where normal people walked with their groceries and their dogs, and their uncomplicated lives. From where I'm standing, Mr. Marciano, I'm still trapped, just in a nicer cell than most. "Call me Enzo," he said, and something in his voice made me turn around. He'd removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and somehow, the less formal appearance made him more dangerous, not less. The way a sheathed blade was more threatening than one already drawn. All potential. All possibility. "If we're going to be working together, you should at least use my name." "Working together?" I repeated. "I thought I was the witness you're keeping safe, not your employee." He moved to a bar cart I hadn't noticed, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. "Those aren't mutually exclusive categories. And you're more than just a witness, Amelia. You proved that in the hotel hallway." He offered me one of the glasses. I took it, though I had no intention of drinking. "I proved I can spot traitors. That doesn't make me qualified for whatever you're imagining. Doesn't it?" He settled into one of the armchairs with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Tell me about your father's business, the construction company. What did you do there?" "I was 17, I said, remaining standing, maintaining distance. "I helped with bookkeeping sometimes, answered phones, filed paperwork, standard office work. But you were there. You saw how it operated. You understood the dynamics." I took a small sip of the drink, expensive whiskey that burned smooth and warm down my throat. I understood enough to know that my father's legitimate business was cover for his not-so-legitimate connections, that the construction jobs were real, but the reason he got certain contracts wasn't about being the best bidder. And when he discovered the leak, the person selling information about schedules and shipments, what did he do? The The memory surfaced unwelcome and sharp. He tried to handle it quietly. Go through proper channels in that world. He trusted the hierarchy, believed in the system. He thought if he reported the betrayal to the right people, justice would be served within the organization. I moved away from the window, suddenly unable to look at the peaceful street. He was wrong. The right people were the wrong people. The hierarchy protected its own interests, not my father's life. Enzo watched me with those dark, assessing eyes. So you learned that formal channels can't be trusted, that the system protects itself, not the individual, that real information has to flow through different routes. He paused. That's a valuable lesson, Amelia, one that many people die without learning. My father died learning it, I said bitterly. I just had the misfortune to survive and carry the knowledge. No. His voice was firm, commanding attention. You had the fortune to survive and learn. There's a difference. He set his glass down, leaning forward with sudden intensity. The men who tried to kill me today weren't random hires, Amelia. They were long-term members of my security team. Vetted, trusted, integrated into every level of my operation, which means whoever turned them has been planning this for months, maybe longer. I processed this, my mind clicking through implications the way it used to when I'd helped my father decode which construction contracts were legitimate and which were fronts. You don't know who else has been compromised. Exactly. You can't trust your usual channels of investigation because those channels might be part of the problem. Also, exactly. So you need someone from outside the system, someone with no previous loyalties, someone who can observe without bias because they have no stake in protecting anyone. I met his eyes. Someone disposable, if it comes to that. His expression hardened. I don't consider you disposable, Amelia. But yes, I need someone who can look at my organization with fresh eyes, who can spot the patterns of betrayal because she's seen them before, who has every reason to be paranoid and suspicious and questioning because that's what's kept her alive. You need a spy, I said flatly, inside your own operation. I need a consultant, he corrected, someone who can help me identify the rot before it spreads further. I laughed, the sound harsh in the elegant space. A consultant. That's a nice word for it. What you really need is someone naive enough to think they can navigate your world without getting destroyed by it. Or someone smart enough to know that destruction is coming either way, and who chooses to meet it on her terms, rather than waiting passively for it to arrive. The words landed like a physical impact, because he was right. I'd spent 8 years running, hiding, trying to disappear into invisibility, and it had worked, until it hadn't. Until my conscience had made me speak up, had pulled me out of the shadows and into the direct line of fire. There was no going back. The moment I'd warned him about the traitors, I'd painted a target on my own back. The only question was whether I'd face what was coming as a helpless victim, or as someone with agency, with power, with a choice in how my story ended. What exactly would this consulting involve? I asked carefully, setting down my untouched whiskey. Enzo stood, moving to a desk against the far wall. He pulled out a file folder, bringing it back to me. These are personnel files. Security team, accounting, operations, logistics. Everyone who had access to my schedule, my movements, my security protocols. He opened the folder, revealing dozens of photographs and documents. I need you to read through these, every detail. Employment history, family connections, financial records, behavioral reports from their supervisors. And I need you to tell me what you see. I looked at the files, at the faces of strangers whose lives I was being asked to examine. What makes you think I'll spot something your people missed? Because your people died when you were 17, he said quietly. Because you spent 8 years learning to read situations, to trust your instincts, to spot the small inconsistencies that mark betrayal. Because you have no emotional investment in protecting any of these individuals, no reason to excuse suspicious behavior because you've known them for years, or because they've been loyal in the past. He paused. And because you saved my life today by noticing what everyone else missed. That's not luck, Amelia. That's skill. I pulled the first file toward me, opening it to reveal the photograph of a man in his early 40s, dark hair graying at the temples, serious expression. Carlo Benedetti, according to the documentation. Head of personal security. Former military, extensive combat training, 15 years with the Marciano organization. This is Carlo, I said. One of your guards from today. Yes. You suspect him? I suspect everyone, Enzo said simply. Until I have reason not to. I studied the photograph, trying to see beyond the professional portrait to the man I'd briefly encountered. He seemed competent, protective. When Tommaso went to check on your story about the cables, Carlo was the one who moved to shield you. Instinctive reaction, not calculated. Good observation, Enzo acknowledged. What else? I flipped through the file, scanning details. Military service in Somalia. Honorable discharge. Started with the Marciano organization at age 28. Married, 2 daughters. Clean financial records. No unusual expenditures or debt. Performance reviews consistently excellent. He's either exactly what he appears to be, I said slowly, or he's very good at maintaining cover. But I paused, something nagging at me. His wife. What does she do? Enzo's expression sharpened. Why? Because betrayal usually has a pressure point. Money, ideology, blackmail, family. Your files show his finances are clean. His loyalty has been consistent. But what about his wife's finances? Her connections? If someone wanted to turn one of your people, they'd look for the vulnerability. And family is always vulnerable. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I'll have someone check. Discreetly. He looked at me with something that might have been approval. That's the kind of thinking I need. The questions no one else is asking because they're too close to the situation. I moved to the next file, then the next, building a mental map of his organization. Faces, names, histories, connections, looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for the small details that didn't quite align. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. The devil lives in details, Minhaneta. Always in the details. Hours passed. Enzo ordered food from somewhere. Italian, naturally, arriving in discreet packaging that gave no indication of the restaurant's identity. We ate while working, him fielding calls in Italian, me absorbed in the files, occasionally asking questions that made him pause and reconsider information he'd previously dismissed. This man, I said, pointing to a photo of a thin, nervous-looking individual in his 30s. Marco Santoro. You have him in logistics. Yes, what about him? His gambling debts. Your file says they were resolved 2 years ago through a payment plan with your organization, but there's no follow-up, no verification that he actually paid off the debt or documentation of where the money came from if he did. Enzo took the file, frowning. You think he's still compromised? I think someone with a gambling problem doesn't usually solve it permanently, I said. They solve it temporarily. And then it comes back, usually worse. If he cleared a significant debt 2 years ago but his salary hasn't increased substantially, where did the money come from? I met his eyes. And more importantly, what did he promise in exchange for that money? He made another call, his voice sharp with command. When he ended it, he looked at me with undisguised respect. You've been at this for 4 hours, and you've already found 2 angles my security team missed. 2 potential weak points, or I'm paranoid and seeing threats where there aren't any. I countered, but without much conviction. The patterns were there once you knew how to look. The small inconsistencies, the unexplained details, the stories that were just a little too neat to be entirely true. Paranoia kept you alive for 8 years, Enzo said. In my world, we call that wisdom. He stood, stretching. Through his dress shirt, I could see the definition of muscle, the physicality that his expensive suits usually concealed. It's late. We should both rest. Tomorrow I'll bring more files, more pieces of the puzzle. You mean I passed some kind of test, I said, calling it what it was. You proved you can do what I need done, he acknowledged. Which is not the same thing as passing a test. Tests have predetermined right answers. What I need is someone who can find answers that haven't been predetermined yet. I closed the file I'd been examining, exhaustion suddenly hitting me like a physical weight. Mr. Marciano. Enzo. Enzo, I corrected, the name strange on my tongue. What happens when we find whoever betrayed you? When we identify the rot, as you called it? What happens to those people? His expression went cold. the warmth I'd almost convinced myself I'd seen vanishing behind a mask of absolute certainty. They answer for their betrayal. Completely. Finally. You mean they die? I said quietly. I mean they face the consequences they invited when they chose treachery over loyalty. He moved toward me, and I fought the urge to step back. Does that bother you, Amelia? Knowing that your investigation will result in deaths? I thought about my father's blood on our kitchen tile, about my mother's screaming, about 8 years of running and hiding and surviving, while the men who'd murdered my family walked free, protected by the same system that had failed us. No, I said honestly. What bothers me is that it doesn't bother me as much as it should. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Good, he said softly. Because this world doesn't have room for half measures or gentle justice. It only has room for consequences and the people strong enough to deliver them. He moved past me toward his own room, pausing at the doorway. Get some rest, consultant. Tomorrow we dig deeper. And Amelia? He looked back over his shoulder. Thank you. For saving my life. And for choosing to stay and help me identify who wants to end it. I didn't have much choice in the staying part, I pointed out. You always have a choice, he replied. You could have refused to help, could have demanded to be released despite the risks, could have fought me every step of the way. His dark eyes held mine. But you didn't. You chose to investigate, to question, to help. That wasn't force, Amelia. That was choice. After he closed his door, I stood in the elegant living room, surrounded by luxury and danger in equal measure, holding files full of other people's secrets, and knowing that my own survival now depended on unraveling those secrets before they unraveled me first. I'd walked into that hotel this morning as a cleaning woman, invisible and anonymous. I'd ended the day as a consultant to a mafia boss, investigating betrayal within his organization, and accepting that my findings would result in executions. The girl my father had raised, the one who believed in justice and loyalty and doing the right thing, would have been horrified. But that girl had died in a pantry 8 years ago. The woman who remained understood that sometimes justice wore expensive suits and spoke Italian. And sometimes doing the right thing meant helping the monster hunt down the people who wanted him dead, even if it meant becoming a monster myself. Morning arrived with the kind of diffuse gray light that promised rain but couldn't commit to it. I woke in the guest bedroom, disoriented by the quality of the sheets. Egyptian cotton, probably, the kind that felt like sleeping in clouds, and the silence. No traffic noise, no neighbors arguing, no radiator clanking, just the soft hum of expensive climate control, and the knowledge that armed men were watching the building. The bathroom was stocked like a luxury hotel. Designer toiletries, plush towels, even a silk robe hanging on the back of the door. I showered quickly, trying not to think too much about how easily I was settling into this borrowed life, this temporary luxury that came with the price tag of investigating betrayals that would end in deaths. When I emerged, dressed in clothes that weren't mine but fit perfectly, another detail that suggested Enzo's organization was disturbingly thorough in its preparations, I found him already in the living room, surrounded by more files than had been there the night before. He was on the phone, speaking rapid Italian while simultaneously reviewing something on his laptop. He'd showered too. I could tell by the damp edges of his hair, the fresh scent of soap and that cedar cologne. He wore different clothes, casual today, dark slacks, and a charcoal sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Without the armor of a suit, he looked younger, though no less dangerous. "Good morning," he said as I approached, ending his call. "Coffee. Please." I moved to the counter where an expensive espresso machine gleamed with the promise of caffeine. "Did you sleep?" "Enough." He gestured to the files. I had more information delivered early. Financial records, phone logs, travel history. The kind of deep dive that takes time, but sometimes reveals patterns that surface-level investigation misses. I made myself coffee, the machine producing a perfect crema that I would have photographed for social media in my previous life, before remembering I no longer had access to that life. No phone, except the one Enzo had provided. Secure, monitored, incapable of reaching anyone from before. "Tommaso?" I asked, Noticing the apartment felt empty despite its occupants. Coordinating surveillance rotations. He'll be back this afternoon. Enzo pulled out a chair at the dining table, which had been converted into a command center. I thought we'd start with financial analysis. Money trails are often more honest than people. I sat across from him, pulling the first stack of documents toward me. These were bank statements, carefully organized by individual. You have access to your employees' personal finances? The ones in sensitive positions sign agreements allowing for routine financial audits, he said. Standard practice in my organization. People with money problems become security risks. I thought about Marco Santoro's gambling debts, the question I'd raised last night about where the resolution money had come from. What did you find out about him? The logistics coordinator? Enzo's expression darkened. His debt was paid off by a loan from his sister, or that's what the documentation shows. But his sister is a schoolteacher in New Jersey. Her salary doesn't support that kind of lending, and there's no record of her taking out a loan herself or liquidating assets. So someone else gave him the money and structured it to look like family assistance. Exactly, which means he's been compromised for at least 2 years, and we never caught it because the paperwork looked legitimate. He pulled up something on his laptop, turning the screen so I could see. I'm having his communications pulled. Emails, texts, phone records. We'll see who he's been talking to and what patterns emerge. Won't that alert him that he's under investigation? I have people who can access those records without triggering notifications. At my skeptical look, he added, You're not the only one who's learned to navigate around formal systems, Amelia. We worked through the morning, building a web of connections on a large whiteboard Tommaso had delivered. Names, dates, financial transactions, travel overlaps. Looking for the patterns my father had taught me to recognize. The constellation of small details that, taken individually, meant nothing, but together revealed a picture. Here, I said, pointing to a cluster of data points. These 3 men, your driver Matteo, your accountant's assistant Vincent, and a warehouse supervisor named Louis. They all took trips to Atlantic City on the same weekend last March. Officially unrelated, Matteo was supposedly visiting family. Vincent claimed a wedding. Louis had vacation days scheduled. But Enzo moved to stand beside me, close enough that I could feel his body heat, smell the cedar of his cologne mixed with espresso. But all 3 have access to different parts of your operation. Matteo knows your daily movements. Vincent sees financial data. Louis controls inventory and shipments. I traced the connections with my finger. Separately, they're useful. Together, they're a complete intelligence package. Everything someone would need to plan an operation against you. His hand came up to rest on the whiteboard beside my diagram, his arm creating a bracket around my space without quite touching me. Atlantic City, where my cousin Angelo runs operations. Is your cousin loyal? To himself, always. To me, usually. His voice held the weight of complicated family history. But if someone offered him the right opportunity to expand his territory by weakening mine, I turned to look at him, realizing how close he was. You think your own family might be involved in this? In my world, Amelia, family is often the first place betrayal breeds. We trust our blood more than we should, give them access that outsiders could never achieve. And sometimes, that trust is the weapon that kills us. Something painful flickered in his expression. My father died because he trusted his brother. I won't make the same mistake. The statement hung between us, heavy with implications. Were you there? I asked quietly. When your father was killed? Yes. Single syllable, but carrying a world of trauma. I was 24, learning the business. He brought me to a meeting with his brother to discuss territorial boundaries, profit sharing, the usual negotiations. He stepped back, breaking the proximity, moving to the window where bulletproof glass separated us from the gray morning. His brother brought a gun instead of good faith. Thought if he removed my father, he could absorb our operations, claim we'd merged, rather than that he'd murdered his way to expansion. What happened? I killed him, said flatly, without drama or emotion, before he could kill me too. And then I spent the next 6 years consolidating power, eliminating his loyalists, proving I was my father's son but smarter, harder, less trusting. He turned back to me. which is why I'm still alive when a dozen other men who inherited young are dead. Because I learned the lesson early, Amelia. The lesson you learned in that pantry. Trust is beautiful, and trust is fatal. I understood then why he'd brought me into this. Not just because I had useful skills or had saved his life, but because I was the only person in his orbit who had no pre-existing loyalties, no complicated family ties, no history that could be leveraged or exploited. I was clean precisely because I'd been nothing to him before yesterday. So what do we do about Atlantic City? I asked. About your cousin? We investigate carefully. Tommaso is arranging for a separate team, people outside my usual structure, mercenaries with no connection to Angelo, to observe him, watch his meetings, track his communications, see if there are patterns that suggest collaboration with whoever tried to kill me. And if you find proof your cousin is involved? His expression went cold, the warmth I'd glimpsed vanishing completely. Then family becomes memory, and threat becomes corpse, in that order. The casual efficiency of the statement should have frightened me. Instead, I felt a grim satisfaction because whoever had tried to kill Enzo had also marked me for death by making me a witness. And I'd spent 8 years running from justice that never came, learning that the system protected the powerful, while the powerless just died. If Enzo was the weapon that would finally deliver consequences, then I'd help him aim. There's more, I said, pulling his attention back to the whiteboard. Look at this pattern of shipments through Lewis's warehouse. Here, and here, all marked as routine deliveries, all signed off by the same supervisor. But the quantities are just slightly off from what the orders specified. Small discrepancies, the kind that could be attributed to routine errors. But? He moved back to the board, studying the highlighted entries. But they're consistently off in the same direction. Always a little less inventory arriving than what was ordered, which means somewhere in transit, product is being diverted. I pulled up the corresponding financial records, and the payments are being processed for the full amount, so the missing inventory represents pure profit for whoever's skimming. Enzo was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with controlled fury. How much? I'd already done the math. Over 18 months, approximately $2.3 million in diverted product. The same amount that's missing from my offshore accounts, he said quietly. Money I thought was stolen electronically. But what if it wasn't stolen at all? What if it was never deposited because the shipments it was supposed to purchase were diverted before they ever reached my operations? Then whoever planned this has been setting you up for years, I concluded. Building a network of compromised employees, skimming product and money, creating a structure that would allow them to make a major move when the timing was right, like trying to kill me and step into the power vacuum. Exactly. He pulled out his phone, dialing with controlled precision. When someone answered, he spoke in Italian, his voice hard and commanding. The conversation was brief, ending with what sounded like clear instructions. Tommaso is bringing in the 3 from Atlantic City, he said. Separately, quietly, tonight. We'll have a conversation about their travel plans and their recent activities. See whose story stays consistent under pressure and whose falls apart. You're going to interrogate them. Not a question. I'm going to give them an opportunity to explain themselves, he corrected. What happens after that depends on the quality of their explanations. I should have felt horror at the thought of what those interrogations might involve. Instead, I felt only a cold satisfaction. These were the men who'd plotted to kill Enzo, who'd made me a target by association, who represented the same kind of betrayal that had killed my father. I want to be there, I said. When you question them. His eyes sharpened. Why? Because I know how liars look. I know the small tells, the inconsistencies, the ways people's stories unravel under pressure. I held his gaze. And because I have a stake in this now, they're not just threats to you anymore. They're threats to me. I want to see their faces when they realize they've been caught. Something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. You understand that what you'll witness won't be gentle. This isn't a police interrogation with lawyers and rights and procedural protections. I understand that you're going to do whatever is necessary to get the truth, I replied, and that the truth will determine whether those men leave this building alive. And that doesn't trouble your conscience? I thought about my father's blood, about my mother's screaming, about 8 years of knowing the men who'd murdered them were protected by money and connections, and a system that valued power over justice. My conscience, I said quietly, died with my family. What's left is pragmatism. And pragmatism says that people who try to kill you should face consequences, real ones, final ones. Enzo moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. You're not what I expected, Amelia Duarte. When I saw you in that hotel hallway, a cleaning woman with a spray bottle, I didn't imagine this. This intensity, this certainty, this capacity for necessary darkness. His hand came up, fingers brushing my jaw in a gesture that was almost tender. Most people who enter my world do it through family obligation or pursuit of power. But you? You're here because you chose conscience over safety, truth over invisibility. That's rare. Or stupid, I countered, though I didn't pull away from his touch. Perhaps both, he allowed, a slight smile softening his expression. But rare nonetheless, and valuable. The moment stretched, charged with something I didn't want to examine too closely. This man was dangerous, criminal, someone who spoke casually about executions and maintained power through violence. Everything I'd spent 8 years trying to escape, but he was also the first person in those 8 years who'd looked at me and seen capability instead of just vulnerability, who'd offered me agency instead of just protection, who'd recognized that I had something valuable to contribute beyond just being kept safe. We should keep working, I said, stepping back, breaking the tension. If Tommaso is bringing them in tonight, we need to have all the evidence ready. Every transaction, every inconsistency, every piece that proves their betrayal. Agreed. He moved back to the laptop, but not before I saw satisfaction in his expression. As if I'd passed some test I didn't know I was taking. We spent the afternoon building the case, assembling evidence into an irrefutable pattern. By the time Tommaso returned, accompanied by additional security I recognized from yesterday, we had documentation that made 3 men's guilt absolutely clear. They're in the building, Tommaso reported. 3rd floor, separate rooms. None of them know the others are here. Good. Enzo stood, rolling his shoulders in a gesture that reminded me he wasn't just a businessman in expensive clothes. He was a man who knew violence intimately, who'd killed his own uncle at 24, who'd built an empire on the foundation of his father's corpse. Amelia, last chance to stay here, to maintain distance from what comes next. I thought about my father, who'd tried to maintain distance, to play by rules that didn't exist in this world, who'd died believing justice would eventually arrive through proper channels. I'm coming, I said. I need to see this. Something like respect crossed his features. Then let's go collect some truths. As we moved toward the door, toward the confrontations that would end with either confessions or corpses, I caught my reflection in the window. The cleaning woman from yesterday was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone capable of witnessing interrogations without flinching, someone who understood that sometimes justice wore expensive suits and spoke Italian. And sometimes, doing the right thing meant helping the monster hunt, even if it meant becoming a monster yourself. The 3rd floor of the building was nothing like the elegant apartment above. This was utility space, unfinished, stripped down to concrete and exposed pipes. 3 rooms had been carved out of the larger space, each with a single metal chair bolted to the floor and a drain in the center. The kind of rooms that were designed to be cleaned easily, the kind of rooms where you could dispose of evidence. I'd expected to feel horror walking into this space. Instead, I felt a strange cold calm, as if 8 years of suppressed rage had finally found an outlet, a channel that didn't require me to be the victim anymore. We'll start with Matteo, Enzo said, his voice carrying the same controlled calm that had settled over him since we'd left the apartment. He's the weakest psychologically, former military, but his service record shows he struggled with authority, got into conflicts with commanding officers. Men like that usually break faster under pressure because they've already internalized that they're not as strong as they pretend to be. Tommaso nodded, moving to open the first door. Inside, Matteo, Enzo's driver, Mid-30s, with the lean, wiry build of someone who stayed fit through nervous energy rather than discipline, sat in the metal chair. His hands were zip-tied behind him, and his eyes widened with confusion when he saw Enzo enter. "Boss? What's going on? Tommaso said there was a security briefing, but—" "Tell me about Atlantic City," Enzo interrupted, his voice pleasant, almost conversational. "Last March, the weekend you visited family." Something flickered in Matteo's expression, fear, quickly masked. "My sister lives there. I went to see her and her kids. Is there a problem?" "Your sister," Enzo repeated, moving to stand directly in front of the chair. "The one who moved to Florida 2 years ago. The one whose current address is Tampa, over 1,000 miles from Atlantic City." "That sister?" Matteo's face went pale. I mixed up. You met with Vincent and Louis that weekend," I said, stepping forward from where I'd been standing by the door. "All 3 of you, staying at different hotels but in the same city for 3 days. What were you discussing?" His eyes fixed on me, confusion evident. "Who the hell is this?" "Boss, I don't know what she's talking about." Enzo's hand shot out, gripping Matteo's jaw with controlled violence. "She is someone who asks questions you're going to answer. The only question is whether you answer them the easy way or the hard way." "I didn't do anything," Matteo insisted, his voice rising with panic. "I've been loyal. I've driven you everywhere for 3 years. You've been feeding information about my movements to whoever paid off your gambling debts," Enzo interrupted. "The ones you accumulated at that casino in Atlantic City. The ones that would have gotten your legs broken if someone hadn't covered them for you." He released Matteo's jaw, stepping back. "And that someone wanted something in return. They wanted access to my schedule, my routes, my security patterns, information you were perfectly positioned to provide." Matteo's resistance crumbled like wet paper. I watched it happen in real time, the moment he understood that denial was pointless, that we already knew everything, that his only remaining currency was cooperation. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered. "They said it was just information. Just keeping them updated on your movements. They said no one would get hurt." "Who are they?" I asked, pulling out the photograph of Enzo's cousin Angelo. "Was it him? Angelo Marciano?" Matteo's eyes went wide, confirmation without words. Enzo's expression went absolutely cold. "My cousin, my family." His voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying. "He approached you when?" 14 months ago, Matteo said, words tumbling out now. "After I lost big at his casino. He said he'd cover my debts if I just kept him informed about your schedule. Said it was family business, nothing personal, just wanting to know when you'd be in his territory so he could plan his own operations accordingly." "And you believed him," Enzo said flatly. "He's your family," Matteo protested weakly. "You thought nothing," Enzo cut him off. "You took money from my enemy and betrayed me for more than a year." He pulled out his phone, showing Matteo something on the screen. "Yesterday's elevator, the one with cut cables. That was supposed to kill me. And you gave them the information they needed to know exactly when I'd be using it." "No!" Matteo's voice broke. "No, I swear I didn't know about that. They never said. Angelo never said he wanted to hurt you. Just information, that's all I was giving him. Just information." I leaned against the wall, watching the betrayer beg, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "Information is a weapon," I said quietly. "You just didn't realize you were loading the gun that was pointed at your boss's head." Enzo looked at me, something unreadable in his expression, then back at Matteo. "Vincent and Louis, they were recruited the same way?" "I don't know about Louis," Matteo said desperately. "Vincent, yes. He has a kid, special needs, medical bills Angelo offered to cover in exchange for financial data. But I don't know about Louis. Angelo kept us separated, said it was safer if we didn't know what the others were providing." "Classical cell structure," I observed. "Keep the assets isolated so if one is compromised, the others remain secure." Enzo nodded, then addressed Tommaso. "Take him to holding. We'll continue this after I've spoken with the others." As Tommaso and 2 other guards moved to escort Matteo out, the driver looked at Enzo with desperate hope. "Boss, I can fix this. I can testify against Angelo. You can be grateful, Enzo interrupted, his voice like winter, that I'm allowing you to live long enough to provide that testimony. After that, your usefulness ends, and so will you. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with Enzo in the concrete room. He stood very still, his control absolute, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness of his jaw. This wasn't just betrayal. This was family betrayal, the kind my father had faced, the kind that cut deepest because it came from where you were supposed to be safest. Your cousin, I said carefully. What will you do about him? What needs to be done, he replied. But first we finish here. Vincent next. I want confirmation that the financial data was being fed to Angelo, then Louis, to understand the full scope of the product diversion. Vincent broke even faster than Matteo. Within 10 minutes, we had a complete confession. 2 years of providing detailed financial information, including offshore account numbers and transaction schedules. His son's medical bills were being paid directly by a shell company registered to one of Angelo's legitimate businesses, a health clinic that specialized in experimental treatments and had enough layers of corporate protection to make the payment trail nearly invisible. I never wanted this, Vincent kept saying, tears streaming down his face. My son needs specialized care. The treatments are experimental, not covered by any insurance. Angelo said he was helping family. My wife is his goddaughter's cousin. He said it was just keeping him informed so he could manage his own investments better, avoid conflicts with your operations. And you believed that? I asked, no sympathy in my voice. For 2 years you believed that? I wanted to believe it, Vincent whispered, because the alternative meant accepting that I was betraying the man who gave me a chance when no one else would hire me. Enzo said nothing, just walked out, leaving Vincent to his tears and his guilt, and the knowledge that his cooperation might buy his son continued treatment, but wouldn't save his own life. Louis was different, harder. Former military like Matteo, but career rather than troubled service. When we entered his room, he didn't ask questions or protest. He just looked at Enzo with steady eyes and said, "How much do you know?" "Everything," Enzo replied. "The shipment diversions, the inventory discrepancies, the 2.3 million in product that disappeared into Angelo's distribution network instead of mine. The question is whether you're going to confirm it or waste both our time with denials." Louis was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Angelo approached me 3 years ago. Said he wanted to expand his operations but needed reliable supply lines. Offered me twice my salary to redirect certain shipments, make it look like routine losses. Theft, spoilage, shipping errors. The money went into an offshore account, untraceable to me unless you had the kind of access to financial records that most organizations don't maintain." "But I do maintain it," Enzo said. "But you do," Louis agreed. "Which is why I knew this day would eventually come. Angelo said you'd never notice. That your operation was too big to track every small discrepancy. He was wrong. I studied Louis, this man who'd betrayed his employer with cold calculation and was now facing consequences with equally cold acceptance." "Why?" I asked. "If you knew you'd eventually be caught, why do it?" "Because the money was good while it lasted," he said simply. "And because I've been in this business long enough to know that everyone eventually ends up in a room like this. The only question is whether you die with money in your accounts or die poor." He looked at Enzo. "I chose money. Pragmatic," Enzo observed, "but ultimately foolish. Because money in your accounts means nothing if you're not alive to spend it." "True," Louis acknowledged. "But 3 years of high living was better than 30 years of taking orders and pretending I didn't resent every minute of it." The honesty was almost refreshing after Vincent's tears and Matteo's protestations. This was a man who'd made his choice with open eyes and was now facing the consequences without delusion or denial. "Angelo's plan," Enzo said. "The elevator, the basement team. How much of that did you know about?" "Nothing," Louis replied. "My arrangement was logistics only. I redirected shipments, falsified inventory records, helped him build his supply network. I never had operational information about your security or movements. That was Matteo's role." "But you knew there was a larger plan," I said. "You knew Angelo wasn't just building a parallel distribution network for business expansion. You knew he was positioning to move against Enzo directly. Louis's silence was confirmation enough. And you didn't warn him, I continued. Didn't tell your actual employer that his cousin was preparing to kill him. You just kept taking the money and letting events unfold. My loyalty, Louis said, was to whoever paid best. Angelo paid best. Simple economics. Enzo's hand moved so fast I barely saw it. One moment he was standing relaxed. The next his fist connected with Louis's jaw with a crack that echoed off concrete walls. Louis's head snapped to the side, blood spraying from his split lip. That, Enzo said calmly, was for simple economics. Tommaso, take him to holding with the others. After Louis was removed, still conscious, still meeting Enzo's eyes with that same cold acceptance, we stood alone in the room again. Blood drops on the concrete floor, the only evidence of violence. Easy to clean. Everything about this space was designed to be easy to clean. You're troubled, Enzo observed, looking at me. I'm not troubled, I replied. I'm thinking. About how easily these men betrayed you. 3 different motivations: gambling debts, medical bills, simple greed, but all led to the same end. Your cousin identified weaknesses and exploited them systematically. He's been planning this for years, building a network within your organization so that when he finally moved, he'd have eyes and hands everywhere. I know, Enzo said quietly. Which means he probably has more people we haven't identified yet. More compromised employees waiting to act when called upon. Unless, I said slowly, the idea forming even as I spoke it, we use the ones we've caught. Turn them back against Angelo. Feed him information through them, but information we control. Make him think his network is still intact and functional, while we actually use it to trap him. Enzo's eyes sharpened with interest. Counterintelligence, use his own spies against him. Exactly. Matteo can continue reporting on your movements, but movements we script. Vincent can provide financial data, but data we manipulate to show false patterns. Even Louis's shipment diversions could continue, but now they'd be empty boxes or shipments we've seeded with tracking devices. I moved to the wall, my mind racing through possibilities. Angelo thinks he has perfect visibility into your operations. We turn that visibility into blindness by feeding him exactly what we want him to see. And then when he moves, based on false information, we're waiting. More than waiting. We're choosing the ground, the timing, the circumstances. We transform from hunted to hunter. I looked at him. But it requires keeping those 3 men alive. Using them. Can you do that? It was a genuine question. Because what I was proposing required Enzo to set aside his instinct for immediate revenge, for final justice, to play a longer, more complex game. He was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, you're suggesting I let the men who betrayed me continue to live, continue to have access to my operations, continue to pose a potential threat. In exchange for the possibility, not certainty, but possibility, of using them to trap Angelo. I'm suggesting you turn a weakness into a weapon, I corrected. These men are compromised, yes, but they're also known quantities now. We understand their motivations, their handlers, their methods. That's more valuable than simply eliminating them and leaving Angelo wondering what we know. And if they betray us again, if they warn Angelo that we've discovered them, then we make the stakes absolutely clear, I said. Matteo's family in Tampa, Vincent's son's medical care, Louis's offshore accounts, all of these are leverage. We make them understand that cooperation buys continued existence. Betrayal costs everything they value. Enzo moved closer, studying me with that intense focus that made me feel simultaneously seen and assessed. You're not just suggesting counterintelligence. You're suggesting I take hostages, use their families as insurance for their continued cooperation. I'm suggesting you use every tool available, I replied. The same way Angelo did. He found weaknesses and exploited them. We do the same thing, but from the other direction. Turn his weapons back against him. You've developed a remarkably ruthless strategic mind, Emilia Duarte. Not quite approval in his voice, but not disapproval either. Something more complex. For someone who was cleaning hotel rooms 2 days ago. I've had 8 years to think about how my father died, I said quietly. 8 years to imagine what justice would look like if the system wasn't designed to protect people like Angelo. 8 years to understand that sometimes fighting monsters requires becoming someone who understands monstrous tactics. His hand came up, fingers tracing the line of my jaw with surprising gentleness. And you're comfortable with that? With becoming what you've spent years running from? I met his eyes, these dark windows into a world I'd once feared, and now found myself actively shaping. I'm comfortable with surviving, with ensuring that this time, the betrayers face consequences instead of walking away clean, with helping you dismantle your cousin's network so thoroughly that he never threatens you again. I paused. And yes, with using their families as leverage if that's what ensures cooperation. Because Angelo would do worse, and because I learned the hard way that mercy is what gets you killed. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. Then we'll do it your way. Keep them alive, turn them into weapons. Use Angelo's own network against him. He stepped back, breaking contact. But understand this, Amelia. Once we start down this path, there's no walking it back. You'll be as complicit in what follows as I am. As guilty by any conventional moral standard of the violence we use to achieve our ends. Good, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Because conventional moral standards failed my family, and I'm done pretending that following rules written by people who've never faced real consequences will somehow produce justice. He smiled then. Not the cold smile I'd seen him use on others, but something warmer, more genuine. My father would have liked you, he said quietly. He believed in loyalty above everything. Believed that the organization was family, that family was sacred. That belief got him killed by his own brother. The warmth faded. I'm smarter than my father. I believe in results, in outcomes, in using every weapon available to protect what's mine and destroy what threatens it. And right now, Amelia, you're proving to be one of the most effective weapons I've ever acquired. I'm not a weapon, I countered. I'm a partner. In this investigation, in this strategy, partners have agency, have equal stake in outcomes. Is that what you want? He moved closer again, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the places where his dangerous life had left its marks. To be my partner? To be complicit not just in investigating betrayal but in executing justice as I define it? I thought about the alternative. Returning to cleaning hotel rooms. Always watching over my shoulder. Always waiting for Angelo's people to find me and eliminate the witness. Living in fear, in hiding, in that half-life I'd endured for 8 years. Or I could step fully into this world. Use the strategic mind I'd inherited from my father. The survival instincts I'd developed since his death. The capacity for necessary darkness I'd discovered in myself over the past 2 days. Become someone who shaped outcomes, rather than just surviving them. Yes, I said. That's what I want. To be your partner. To help you dismantle Angelo's network and ensure he pays for trying to kill you. And after that, I paused, the future suddenly visible in a way it hadn't been since I was 17. After that, to continue doing what I'm apparently good at. Identifying threats, developing strategies, turning weaknesses into weapons. A consultant, he said, echoing his word from yesterday but with new meaning. But not just temporarily. Not just until this crisis is resolved. You're proposing a permanent position. I'm proposing, I corrected, a permanent partnership, where my strategic mind and your operational capability combine to ensure that betrayal, from inside or outside, never comes this close to succeeding again. His hand moved to the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair, not controlling, but connecting. And what do you want in return for this partnership? Money? Protection? Power? Security, I said simply. Real security, not hiding and hoping I'm never found. But the kind of security that comes from being essential, from being valued, from being protected because eliminating me would cost more than keeping me safe. I held his gaze. and the satisfaction of finally seeing justice delivered to men like Angelo. Men like the ones who killed my father. Men who think they're untouchable. Then we have a deal, Enzo said softly. Partner. And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming and intense, his mouth on mine with the same certainty he brought to every decision. I responded without thinking, my hands finding the planes of his chest, feeling the solid reality of him beneath expensive fabric. This was dangerous. This was complicated. This was mixing professional partnership with something far more volatile. I didn't care. For 8 years, I'd been half alive, existing in fear and caution. Now, in the space of 2 days, I'd found purpose, agency, and a capacity for necessary darkness I'd never acknowledged in myself. And apparently, I'd also found this. Connection, chemistry, desire. With a man who was absolutely wrong by every conventional measure. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Enzo rested his forehead against mine. "This is unwise," he murmured. "Probably," I agreed, "but wisdom is overrated." His laugh was quiet, genuine. "Consorting with the boss. That's what they'd call it in any normal organization." "Good thing this isn't a normal organization," I replied, "and I'm not a normal consultant." "No," he agreed, pulling back to look at me with eyes that held heat and assessment in equal measure. "You're definitely not." Tommaso's knock at the door interrupted the moment. "Boss, the 3 are secured in holding, and we've had confirmation. Angelo just called Matteo's phone. Probably checking in, expecting a report." Enzo's expression shifted, heat transforming into cold strategy. "Perfect timing. Let's give him exactly what he expects. Amelia, time to test your counterintelligence theory." As we moved to leave the room, to begin the complex game of feeding false information to an enemy who thought he was winning, I caught my reflection again in the small window. The cleaning woman was gone completely now. In her place, someone harder, someone capable, someone who'd chosen to stop running and start fighting. Someone who understood that sometimes justice required getting your hands dirty. And sometimes, the monster you helped hunt became the man you kissed. The world wasn't simple, but maybe that was okay. Maybe complicated was exactly where I was meant to be. 3 weeks after the interrogations, we'd transformed Enzo's compromised network into a weapon of surgical precision. Matteo reported false movements to Angelo, carefully scripted trips to locations we'd selected, meetings that didn't exist, security patterns that had been deliberately altered. Vincent provided manipulated financial data, showing investments in vulnerable areas, cash flows we wanted Angelo to believe were exposed. Lewis continued diverting shipments, but now they contained tracking devices embedded in merchandise that would lead us directly to Angelo's distribution centers. Angelo, believing he had perfect visibility, was making moves. Aggressive moves, trying to consolidate territory while he thought Enzo was distracted elsewhere. Approaching Enzo's legitimate business partners with offers that assumed Enzo's organization was weakening from internal strain. He had no idea he was walking into a trap we'd spent weeks perfecting. The command center in the Brooklyn brownstone had expanded. More screens, more surveillance feeds, more evidence accumulating in real time. I'd learned to read the patterns, to predict Angelo's next moves based on the information we fed him. Enzo had been right. I had a talent for strategic thinking, for seeing the connections others missed. But I'd also discovered something else. I was good at this world in ways that went beyond pure analysis. I understood the psychology of betrayal, the patterns of organizational weakness, the ways information flowed through criminal networks. 8 years of watching and surviving had given me insights that formal training never could. "He's moving," Tommaso announced, pointing to one of the screens. "Just put 8 men on the warehouse in Queens, the one where we've been feeding information about a major cash shipment." "How many does he have total?" I asked, moving to study the surveillance feeds. 20 confirmed, Tommaso replied. Another dozen possible. He's been recruiting from smaller organizations, promising them better territory and higher percentages once he takes over Enzo's operations. "Arrogant," I observed, assuming victory before the battle is even engaged. "Family," Enzo said from where he stood at the windows, his usual position when thinking through final strategic decisions. He believes blood gives him advantages, that our shared history means he understands me better than I understand him. But he's wrong, I said, moving to stand beside him. Over the past weeks, this had become our pattern, strategic discussions that happened in proximity, as if physical closeness enhanced intellectual connection. Because you've done what he never expected. You brought in someone from completely outside the family structure. Someone with no previous loyalties, no preconceptions about how things should work. Someone who could see the patterns precisely because she wasn't part of them. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining, a gesture that had become natural over the weeks of working together, planning together, existing in this strange partnership that was part professional, part something far more complicated. He spread his forces across 4 locations, Tommaso continued, mapping them on the main screen. The Queen's Warehouse, the restaurant in Little Italy that's been laundering his money, his casino in Atlantic City, and his home base in New Jersey, thinks he's covering all angles, protecting all his assets while he moves against what he believes are your vulnerable points. But he's actually divided his strength, I said, seeing the opportunity immediately. Spread thin across defensive positions because he's paranoid about retaliation, while simultaneously trying to execute an offensive operation. Classic mistake. Trying to attack and defend simultaneously, with insufficient resources for either. Enzo smiled, the expression cold and predatory. Which means if we hit him everywhere at once, he won't have enough people at any single location to mount effective resistance. Coordinated strike, Tommaso agreed. 4 teams, simultaneous action, overwhelming force at each point. By the time he realizes what's happening, it's too late to consolidate or reinforce. What about legal exposure? I asked, the question that always needed to be voiced, even if the answer was already decided. 4 simultaneous operations, all violent, all leaving evidence. That's harder to contain than a single incident. Already addressed, Enzo replied. Half the police commanders in those jurisdictions are on payroll. The ones who aren't will receive calls from the ones who are, explaining that these are internal organizational matters. Street cleaning, essentially. The kind of thing that happens when old power structures need reinforcement. I should have been horrified by the casual admission of police corruption, by the acknowledgement that law enforcement would actively look the other way while violence was committed. Instead, I felt only grim satisfaction. Because this was the same system that had failed my family, that had protected my father's killers because they had the right connections, the right money, the right last names. If the system was broken, then using its brokenness to deliver justice seemed perfectly appropriate. When? I asked. Tonight, Enzo decided. Angelo just moved his Queen's team into position. He's committed now, believes he's executing his attack. We let him think that for the next 6 hours, let him get confident and focused on what he believes is happening. Then we hit all 4 locations simultaneously at midnight. Poetic, I observed. The witching hour. Practical, he corrected. Lowest police patrol density, maximum civilian absence from the areas, darkness to conceal movement. Poetry is inefficient. Tommaso began making calls, coordinating teams, confirming weapons and vehicles and timing. The apartment filled with quiet, efficient activity. Men checking equipment, reviewing target photographs, receiving final instructions in Italian that I'd learned to understand over the weeks of immersion. You'll stay here, Enzo said to me, anticipating my next question. With Carlo and a security detail. You're too valuable to risk in direct action, and Angelo doesn't know you exist. That anonymity is leverage we need to preserve. I thought we were partners, I challenged, though I'd known this was coming. Knowing I was strategic support, rather than tactical operations. Knowing my value was in planning, not execution. We are, he confirmed, turning to face me fully. Which is why I need you here, alive, continuing to be brilliant so that if something goes wrong tonight, someone I trust absolutely can continue the operation. His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs stroking my cheekbones with unexpected tenderness. You've helped me build this trap, Amelia, but I need you to survive it so we can build the next one. The logic was sound. The protective instinct behind it was also clear, and something I'd grown to recognize over the weeks of watching Enzo transform from captor to partner, to whatever this complicated connection had become. "Just don't die," I said, trying for lightness and failing. I've gotten used to having a partner who appreciates strategic thinking. "I'll do my best," he replied, and then kissed me. Brief, intense, carrying weight that neither of us had fully articulated yet. Too soon, probably. Too complicated, definitely, but real nonetheless. The teams deployed at 11:30, black SUVs disappearing into the November darkness. I watched from the windows as they left, then moved to the command center where multiple screens showed surveillance feeds from all 4 target locations. Carlo stood beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. "You did good work," he said quietly. "The boss doesn't trust easy. Doesn't partner easy. But you got past his walls faster than anyone I've seen. Or I just happened to save his life at exactly the right moment to bypass normal vetting," I replied, though I knew it was more than that. Enzo and I had connected on something deeper than circumstance, a shared understanding of betrayal, of survival, of the necessity of sometimes choosing darkness to achieve justice. "Maybe," Carlo acknowledged, "but staying past that initial moment, proving your value day after day, that was you, not circumstance." The screen showed activity beginning, teams moving into position, weapons visible, coordination evident in their synchronized movements. Professional, efficient, overwhelming. At midnight exactly, they hit. I watched it unfold in real time, across 4 screens. Doors breaching, men flowing through openings with tactical precision, resistance crumbling under superior force and planning. Angelo's people had been prepared for defense or offense, but not for coordinated assault on all fronts simultaneously. The Queen's Warehouse fell in 7 minutes. Little Italy restaurant in 5. The casino took longer, 12 minutes, complicated by civilians who needed to be evacuated before the violence escalated. But eventually, that fell too, which left New Jersey, Angelo's home base, where the man himself was coordinating what he thought was his victory, surrounded by his remaining loyal soldiers. The feed showed Enzo's team approaching the compound, a large estate similar to the safe house, but less elegant, more fortress-like. High walls, security gates, probably armed guards at multiple points. "This one will be harder," Carlo murmured. "Angelo chose this location specifically because it's defensible, and he'll fight hardest when it's his own home being invaded." I watched Enzo on the screen, identifiable by his bearing, his movements, the way the other men deferred to him even in the midst of action. He was giving orders, positioning teams, preparing for what would likely be the bloodiest confrontation of the night. The assault began. Unlike the other locations, this wasn't about overwhelming force and quick surrender. This was a battle, gunfire visible on the feeds, men taking cover, tactical advancement foot by foot. Angelo's people were fighting for their lives, their leader, their organization. And they were good. But Enzo's people were better, and they had the advantage of surprise, of momentum, of having already eliminated Angelo's external support. 20 minutes into the assault, the front gate fell. 30 minutes, they were inside the main house. At 40 minutes, I saw Enzo disappear into a room that the architectural plans labeled as a study. The screen went dark. Either the camera in that area had been disabled, or Enzo had deliberately cut the feed. 5 minutes of silence, of not knowing. Then Enzo emerged, his expression grim but satisfied. He spoke into his radio, words I couldn't hear but that caused immediate relaxation in the team's posture. "Stand down. Victory." The feed from inside the study restored, and I saw Angelo, older than Enzo, with the same aristocratic features but softer, weaker around the jaw and eyes. He sat in a chair similar to the ones we'd used for interrogations. But this time the restraints weren't zip ties. They were ropes, professionally knotted, the kind that would hold against any struggle. And he was bleeding. Not critically, but enough to know that resistance had been offered and overcome. "Carlo?" Enzo's voice came through the speakers. "Bring Amelia." I looked at Carlo in surprise. He said I was staying here. "Boss changed his mind," Carlo replied, already moving toward the door. "Happens when he wants someone to see something important. And you, partner, apparently need to see this." The drive to New Jersey took 40 minutes, Carlo pushing the SUV at speeds that were probably illegal, but that no police officer would ticket, not with Enzo's connections, not tonight. We arrived to find the compound secured, Enzo's people stationed at regular intervals, the sounds of battle replaced by the quiet efficiency of cleanup. Enzo met me at the door, his shirt stained with blood that I hoped wasn't his expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" I asked immediately, reaching for him. "Not my blood," he confirmed, catching my hands. "Angelo's people fought hard. We had casualties. 2 wounded, none critical. But we won." He paused. "And now I need you to see something, to make a choice." He led me through the house, expensive in the way Angelo's Atlantic City casino had been expensive, but without taste. All flash, no substance. We reached the study where Angelo sat, bound and bleeding, watching our approach with eyes that held fear and fury in equal measure. "So this is her," Angelo said, his accented English carrying contempt. "The cleaning woman who destroyed my operation. Enzo's new whore consultant." Enzo's fist connected with Angelo's face before I could even process the insult. The older man's head snapped back, more blood flowing from a broken nose. "Respect," Enzo said coldly, "or I remove your tongue before I kill you." "She deserves to hear this," Angelo spat, blood on his lips. "Deserves to know what she's gotten herself into. You think you're his partner? You think you're special? He's using you, girl. The same way he uses everyone. You're a tool, nothing more. And when you stop being useful, you'll end up in a room just like this one. Just like me." I should have been shaken by the words. Should have questioned whether Angelo was right, whether my partnership with Enzo was anything more than exploitation dressed in pretty promises. Instead, I felt only cold certainty. "You tried to kill him," I said quietly, moving closer to Angelo. "Your own cousin, your own blood. You spent years building a network of betrayal, recruiting his people, stealing his resources, all to take what he'd built." "Family business," Angelo replied. "The strong take from the weak. Always has been, always will be. Enzo's father was weak. Trusted the wrong brother. Enzo is stronger, but still weak enough to trust Cleenan's staff over his own blood." "I'm not part of his blood," I countered. "That's exactly why he could trust me. Because I had no pre-existing loyalty to you, no family obligation that would make me hesitate or compromise. I could see your betrayal clearly precisely because I wasn't blinded by family bonds." "You're blinded by other things," Angelo said, his smile cruel despite the blood. "You think this ends with my death? I'm not the only one who sees Enzo's weaknesses, not the only one who wants what he has. You've helped him eliminate one threat, girl. Congratulations. There are a dozen others waiting to take my place." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. "Let them come, let them try. Because now Enzo has something they don't expect. Someone who specializes in identifying traitors before they can strike. Someone who understands betrayal because she's lived through it." I leaned closer, meeting Angelo's eyes directly. "You were right about one thing. I am a tool, but not the kind you think. I'm the blade that cuts through loyalty to find treachery. And I'm very, very good at my job." Angelo laughed, the sound wet and painful. "You're fooling yourself, girl. You're not a blade. You're a pet. Enzo's exotic acquisition. Something different and interesting to play with until the novelty wears off." I looked at Enzo, reading the question in his expression. This was why he'd brought me here. Not just to see Angelo captured, but to witness what came next. To be offered a choice about how this ended. "Partners make decisions together," I said to Enzo. "Pets are told what to do. Which am I?" His slight smile held approval. "What do you think should happen here?" I studied Angelo. This man who'd tried to kill Enzo, who'd corrupted his employees, who'd stolen millions and almost succeeded in tearing down everything Enzo had built. This man who represented the same kind of betrayer who'd killed my father while smiling at family dinners. "He can't be allowed to survive," I said, the words coming easier than they should have. "Dead, he's a warning. Alive, he's a rallying point for others who might think they can succeed where he failed." I paused. "And he's family, which means killing him sends a message that's even clearer. that blood doesn't grant immunity from consequences. That's your recommendation? Enzo asked. Execution? That's my strategic assessment, I corrected. The decision is yours. You're the one who has to live with killing your own cousin. I've already made that decision, Enzo said quietly. Made it the moment he cut those elevator cables. Made it again every time his network reported my movements and helped plan my murder. He looked at Angelo with something that might have been regret, or might have been simple acknowledgement of necessity. But I wanted you to be part of this moment, Amelia. To see what our partnership results in. To choose whether you can continue down this path, knowing where it leads. I understood then. This wasn't about getting my approval for Angelo's execution. That had been decided long before tonight. This was about testing whether I could witness the darkest part of Enzo's world and still choose to remain part of it. About whether I was truly his partner in all things, or just a consultant who preferred to keep her hands technically clean. Do it, I said, and then we continue. Because Angelo is right about one thing. There will be others. And they'll need to understand that this organization is no longer vulnerable to internal betrayal. Enzo nodded once, then turned to Tommaso. Make it clean, quick, no suffering. He doesn't get to claim martyrdom through torture. Tommaso pulled out a gun, checked the magazine with professional efficiency. Angelo's eyes went wide with real fear for the first time. Enzo, wait, we can make a deal. I have information, connections, resources you can use. You had loyalty. Enzo interrupted. You had family. You chose betrayal instead. And now you face the only consequence that matters. He took my hand, leading me toward the door. We were in the hallway when the gunshot sounded. Single, final, ending Angelo Marciano's life and his attempt to take Enzo's empire. I didn't flinch, didn't look back. Just kept walking beside Enzo, our fingers intertwined, accepting that this was what partnership meant in his world, in our world. Are you all right? He asked when we reached the SUV, his hands on my shoulders, studying my face for signs of trauma or regret. I'm fine, I said truthfully. He made his choice years ago. Tonight was just the final consequence of that choice. Most people would be disturbed by witnessing execution, Enzo observed, by being complicit in murder, even justified murder. Most people, I replied, haven't spent 8 years knowing that the men who killed their father were walking free because the system protected them. Most people haven't learned that justice is something you have to take, rather than something that's given. I met his eyes. I'm not most people, Enzo. You knew that when you made me your partner. I did, he agreed. But knowing it intellectually and seeing you fully embrace it are different things. He pulled me closer, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. You could still walk away, Amelia. After tonight, after Angelo is eliminated and the immediate threat is neutralized, you could return to civilian life. I'd protect you, ensure your safety, give you enough money to disappear properly this time. Is that what you want? I asked, the question carrying weight. For me to disappear now that the crisis is resolved? No, he said immediately. I want you to stay, to continue being my partner in every sense of that word. To help me rebuild the organization with better security, better vetting, better identification of threats before they mature into crises. He paused. And I want you to be with me. Not as an employee or a consultant or even just a strategic partner, but as someone who understands what I am, what I do, what this life requires, and who chooses it anyway. Then that's what I choose, I said simply. To stay. To build. To be your partner in all the ways that matters. I reached up, pulling him down into a kiss that was different from the ones before. Not just desire or chemistry, but commitment, acceptance, choice. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. You know what this means, Amelia Duarte. What staying means. The life you're choosing. I know, I confirmed. It means danger, moral compromise, living in a world where violence is currency and loyalty is survival. It means helping you identify threats and eliminate them before they can succeed. It means being complicit in everything you do, every decision you make, every consequence you deliver. And that doesn't frighten you? Of course it frightens me, I admitted. But it frightens me less than returning to invisibility, to hiding, to being powerless. I spent 8 years as a victim of circumstances I couldn't control. Here, with you, I have agency, power, purpose, the ability to ensure that betrayers face consequences rather than walking away clean. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes fully. That's worth the moral cost. That's worth choosing darkness over hiding in the shadows. His smile was genuine, unguarded in a way I rarely saw. Then welcome to the Empire, partner. Let's go build something that can't be torn down by simple betrayal. The weeks that followed transformed Enzo's organization from the ground up. With Angelo eliminated and his network dismantled, we implemented new security protocols, new vetting procedures, new communication systems that made another internal conspiracy nearly impossible. I'd found my purpose, not as a consultant temporarily helping with a crisis, but as Enzo's second, his strategic mind, the person who identified threats before they could fully form. I moved into the Brooklyn brownstone permanently, not as a guest or protected witness, but as Enzo's partner in every sense that mattered. The bedroom I'd been assigned that first night became our bedroom. The command center became my office. The elegant apartment became our home base for an organization we were rebuilding into something stronger. The cleaning woman who'd walked into the Venetian Grand was gone completely. In her place, someone who understood power, who wielded strategy like a weapon, who had chosen darkness over invisibility and found purpose in it. I'd saved Enzo's life that day in the hotel hallway. But in the months that followed, he'd given me something more valuable than protection or safety. He'd given me back my agency, my power, my ability to be something more than a victim hiding from her past. We weren't conventional. We weren't moral by most standards. We built an empire on violence and control and the systematic elimination of threats. But we were effective. We were united. We were exactly what each other needed. And when Enzo looked at me across the breakfast table each morning, reviewing intelligence reports and planning the day's operations, I saw the same thing reflected in his eyes that I felt in my own chest. Recognition, partnership, and something that might have been love if either of us believed in something that simple. We were monsters, perhaps, but we were monsters together, and that made all the difference.